Right. Now, understanding that still the brain is like a muscle, right? The more you train it, the more prepared it is to make better decisions. For instance, if someone has never read more than 50 pages in a book, it is evident that reading a novel like Atlas Shrugged will take that person way more time and way more effort than someone who has read 1,000 books in their life, right? The brain gets used to the training that you give it, right? If you expose it to more intellectual conversations, to better books, to art, then your brain will develop capacities of understanding reality better than people who are never exposed to those things and just like stay in their own bubble of like mentality, right? Given this, and we know that, for example, we can train our brain to have better memory, we can train our brain to develop better reading comprehension, we can train our brain to develop courage, right? If you constantly are challenging yourself into conquering little fears, like for example, if you are afraid of talking to strangers, but you constantly push yourself to do so, you will eventually conquer that fear.
Yeah, but I wouldn't put it as you train your brain.
Okay.
I think you acquire a whole bunch of knowledge and a whole bunch of ideas that you then store in your mind. Mm-hmm. And that then plays out in your life as you're living it. So I mean, take a simple example. And Ayn Rand called this, it's a process of automatizing that at first requires a lot of conscious, deliberate focus and thinking, and then it gets stored in your subconscious or in your mind. I mean, think of when you were learning mathematics. You're learning addition, subtraction, division. It was hard at the start, and you have to really sit down and figure it out. And now, like, what's 4 times 5? Comes to mind automatically, 20. And that, so you could call that training your brain, but I think what it is, you're absorbing knowledge, and then that knowledge is available in new situations as you're dealing with them. And it allows you to focus on something new because there's so many things now that are automatic that come to you.
Like the performance of last night of Siriano, that the actors were saying, right? That it comes like automatic.
Yeah,
but I wasn't there because I was training my brain for this interview.
Oh, yeah.
How's it going so far? Was the training good?
Yeah. I wanted to add something to that, which is that part of the way that you raised the question was you talked about exposing the brain to certain kinds of environments, certain kinds of music, and I mean, I wanted to get on board with what most of you were saying, but it's important, I think, that you could have two people in the same situation. They're exposed to the same influences, they hear the same ideas, they hear the same music, whichever you want. But what free will really means is that those people can choose to process that differently. Some people are going to listen to what's being said, they're going to think about whether they agree with it, whether it makes sense to them before they accept it or reject it. Others maybe are just going to passively absorb it. And I mean, part of the reason why people find the idea of determinism plausible, why they're skeptical of the idea of free will, is because there are a lot of people out there who, when they're exposed to certain things, just do passively absorb it. And as a result, they end up kind of acting as if they were determined.
So they choose to passively absorb it. They choose not to. So she put it, the choice to think or not to think.
Right.
So if they choose not to think, then they are much more a product of their environment. But it's not determined that they're a product.
That's why she always said that you can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality, right? Eventually, it will get cut off, and this is what I see in Latin America. People deliberately choose to ignore the realities of economics and of history, which teach us that communism and socialism doesn't work. They decide to ignore it. They try one more time. And again, the result is misery and hunger and poverty, right? It's like a...
Yeah, and that's an important point, because her view that it's a choice to think or not to think, and not to think includes two things. Part of what Ben was bringing up, it's you might just passively, I'm not thinking about this, I'm not exerting any energy, effort, I'm just sitting back, and this is what's hitting me, and I absorb some of it, and I don't. That's a very passive process. But there's a process that she calls evasion,
right,
which is you actively work not to see. You don't want to face reality. You don't want to face the consequences. You want to have super high taxes and don't want to think about, well, can we really pay for this? What's this going to do in a year from now? Is it going to bankrupt our country?
Right.
You push that out of mind. I don't want to see this. And maybe you tell yourself, like a Keynesian, well, the long run doesn't matter.
Exactly.
And so you give yourself a rationalization that enables you to push it out of mind. And she calls that evasion. And it's important that the choice to think or not to think includes both. You can be really passive or you can be actively avoiding reality.
Right.
Interestingly, I think she would also say that denying the existence of free will itself works as an evasion because people will use it to rationalize the terrible things they've done. They'll say, I couldn't help it. Or they'll say, we're all sinners. We live in an imperfect world.
Right.